You know what I've always wondered? What's on the edge of Skyrim's map? Like if you walk up to the invisible wall that surrounds the game and just start following it in a circle, what would you find? It turns out a lot more than you might think. There are mysterious snowy pathways, liminal spaces tucked way up in the mountains, places that just look extremely normal, and some of them are places you've probably walked by hundreds of times without even realizing you were on the edge of the world. So today we're walking clockwise, starting in the center of the southern edge of the map, stopping at 12 unremarkable and odd locations I discovered, all of which are pressed up against that invisible boundary that every open world game has. Past the town of Falkreath in the secluded mountains of the southern border of Skyrim, you can find a path that leads all the way out into the wilderness and up to our first location, an abandoned border gate. There are a few of these gates along the edge of Skyrim that we're going to be looking at today, and I've always assumed that they were built by the government here to serve as like official entry points to the province of Skyrim. With this one, you can actually walk through it and go about 50 yards into the distance, which might technically mean that this is one place in Skyrim that isn't technically in the province of Skyrim. No matter how hard we try, there is no going beyond this point on the path, at least not without using some sort of cheat or console command. And it's weird to be able to look into the distance and just wonder what other lands this path may go to. The cool thing is, we don't actually have to wonder, at least in this case. If you know anything about Skyrim, you'll know that this game is set in a single section of a much larger world. Here's a map of the entire continent, and here is Skyrim up top, which means that symbolically, this path continues onward all the way into the land of Cyrodiil, which is the setting of the previous game in the series, The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. Do you think if we booted up Oblivion, we could find the other end of this path and look back towards Skyrim? Welcome to The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion, for a second. The answer is sort of. It's hard to know if this is the exact path we were looking at since there's a lot of out-of-bounds space between the two regions, but I think there's a good chance that this path you see here is the same one that we see at that gate in Skyrim. So if we put them side by side, in some way we're kind of symbolically looking at each other across time and across games. Now obviously, back in Skyrim, if we use a console command and break out, we can see that it actually just fades into nothingness once it gets beyond the area where the player can see, but hey, that's why I said symbolically. Continuing on to stop number 2 takes us a bit further west to a much less official location, this really skinny waterfall. Look at how tall and skinny this waterfall is. It's really tall and skinny. This waterfall is the edge of the world here, and its source, the place where it comes from, is somewhere way up here where we aren't able to go. Having something like a waterfall on the edge of the map is really wonderful to me, because if you have a waterfall, that means you know that there is some kind of stream feeding that waterfall, and just like having a path that goes off the edge of the world, it subconsciously alerts your brain that the world you're playing in is just one small part of something bigger. In some ways, this waterfall on a mountain is more elegant a solution for this problem than the invisible wall along a path, because there's this big insurmountable physical object that serves as justification for why we can't leave, but I like the invisible wall method just as well. Both of them work. Where the waterfall here hits the ground, it creates a little stream that flows into a pond, but it doesn't go any further than that. Maybe it just seeps into the groundwater, or drips into a cave, perhaps. It's fascinating to see all the ways that a game developer can choose to handle making the edge of an open world, because even though they're all technically similar, just having something like a waterfall or a path or my full name and address listed on a data broker's website without my permission can completely change the way that you interact with the space. Wait, no, that last one was wrong. I meant to say some really atmospheric rocks way up in the sky, because that's the next place we're going to be looking at, but for some reason I said something about my personal information. I don't know how I'm actually going to make this transition work, so let me just do it. Delete Me. Welcome to the sponsorship. So a few months ago, the folks from the company Delete Me approached me about doing a sponsorship, and like I do with every sponsorship, I told them that first I would have to look into what their thing was and figure out if it sucked. Now, what Delete Me tells you is that they are a, quote, hands-free subscription service that removes your personal information from hundreds of data broker and people search sites, reducing the risk of your valuable data getting into the wrong hands. But what does that mean? Well, there is a lot of information available about you publicly on the internet, but generally all of your information is spread around and each piece of it is not super easy to find. But then these people, Delete Me calls them data brokers. These data brokers go and find all of those individual pieces of information, gather them up into one place and build a little profile, and then sell that profile to anybody who wants it. This can be advertisers, political campaigns, people who have a grudge against you, criminals, There's actually a ton of interesting nuance to how these data brokers get this information and what they use it for and why it's so difficult to combat the issue. But Delete Me is only really paying me for 90 seconds of ad time, and I'm probably already going over that. So for now, the point is that there is a way to get this information off of these nasty websites, and it's called, you guessed it, Delete Me. You sign up, fill out your info, and then they start manually getting in touch with all of these websites and sending requests to remove your information. After a few weeks, they send you a little report about all the websites they removed your information from. And also on their website, it sends you these little alerts about information they think might be related to you. So for example, I just went on it this morning and they literally had surfaced my beloved dead grandmother's name. And they were like, do you know this person? And I was like, I did know that person. Rest in peace. So then I had to be like, yeah, and then they'll go take care of it. I like Delete Me. I'm going to keep using it. And if you also want to use it, go to joindeleteme.com/AnyAustin and use promo code AnyAustin to get 20% off your consumer plan. That is joindeleteme.com/AnyAustin, promo code AnyAustin. There's a QR code on screen if you would rather not type anything, or like if you're watching on your TV. Shout out to those of you watching on TV. Shout out to those of you eating dinner. Anyway, what was I talking about? Our next location in Skyrim is basically just some rocks, but it's really so much more than that. These rocks are way up in the mountains behind the city of Markarth, and they can only be accessed by doing the Skyrim mountain climbing thing, where you frantically mash the jump button and turn back and forth to glitch your way up steep slopes. I love frantically mashing the jump button and turning back and forth in Skyrim. It's one of the few times that you're actually directly doing something with your body in a Bethesda game. Most Bethesda games feel kind of like your character is psychic. You know, there's no animation really for entering doors. You just kind of teleport inside buildings. You click A on an item and it just instantaneously disappears into your inventory. A lot of what your character does in Skyrim feels a little bit separated from what you're doing as the player holding a controller. And that's a huge part of the charm of Bethesda games. But this isn't the case with Skyrim mountain climbing. Skyrim mountain climbing is one of the few bits of what I would call actual gameplay in Skyrim, where you're actually pushing buttons in a specific fashion to try and make a specific physical thing happen within the game. And I think that's part of why it resonates so strongly with people, despite the fact that it's totally unrealistic and weird. Anyway, this location, which we should actually be looking at night, by the way, nighttime. This is a spot on the western edge of the world, and it's a perfect example of what you'll find if you do enough Skyrim mountain climbing. Nothing. Everything up here is purely decorative. There's nothing to interact with. No flowers to collect, no people to see, no enemies to kill. It's just a bunch of textures of rocks and grass and dirt, which is incredible, obviously. It really feels like you're out in the middle of nowhere, pushed up against the edge of the map, maybe for the first time on our journey so far. If you look down from the right place, you can actually see inside the city of Markarth, which technically you're not supposed to be able to do because it's only actually accessible by entering through the loading screen at the front gates. So that's kind of neat. Let's hop down there and head to our next place on the list. This next stop is called Deep Folk Crossing, and holy smokes, do I love it. At first glance, it just looks like a nice bridge over a little stream, and that's also what it looks like at all of the other glances, because that is what it is. But if you're walking across that bridge and you take a moment to stop and look towards the stream, what you probably didn't realize is that you're looking at the edge of the map. That's right, this nondescript little stream is the edge of the map. You can hop off the bridge and walk upstream to the source, which is just coming out of this little rock. And then if you try hard enough, you can actually get on top of this rock and walk about 10 more feet before you hit the invisible wall of the world, which is just a little snowy clearing. It's certainly not the most dramatic place we're going to look at today, but of all the places we've looked at so far, this might be my favorite. You know, it's one thing to have a big gate for the edge of the world, or an amazing waterfall, or a giant mountain, but to have something so unassuming that you don't even realize it's the edge of the world when you walk by it is awesome. It's like walking across, you know, like if you ever go to Europe and you walk across some bridge and then later some guy comes up to you and he goes, did you know that's the bridge where the King Arthur blew up the dragon, or whatever it is. That's not it, but this also might be the westernmost point on the map, at least based on where the fast travel marker is, so that's kind of cool. If you follow the path north from this bridge and continue to hug the boundary of the world, you'll reach this spot, the Winter Wonderland. I call it that because when you look out into this area, the snow is so still, the clearing is so untouched and quiet. It reminds me of going out in fresh snow when I was a kid, before the cars had come through or the people had ruined the vibe, and that's a very nostalgic feeling. We are just to the west of Mor Kazgur, looking out into one of the few clearings that gives you a good view of the area beyond the mountains. And if you didn't didn't know that there was an invisible wall here, you might just assume you could walk out into this area, but you can't. And something about that feeling of seeing a place that looks so approachable but being unable to physically go there, just really gets me going. It feels like looking at like a text that you've typed out but you just never hit send on, you know? Like it's so there, but it's so not actually there. Now, technically, we can use a console command to fly the camera out here and see what it might be like, but looking at it from afar definitely preserves the sense of magic that we are trying to experience with this video. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna look at it from afar, right here behind me. Isn't it nice? Trekking further, we end up pushing past Pinefrost Tower and over the mountains themselves until we see another new type of barrier for this world, water. And I wanna pause up top here before we actually go down to the place that we're gonna look at, because this is something really cool and really important. We're way up here in the mountains, having finally just crested them, and we're overlooking the ocean, right? There are these little islands and bays and trees all down below, and the level of detail of these objects is clearly much lower than when we're up close, which is something that I really miss from older video games like Skyrim, because it kind of messes with your sense of perception. It somehow makes these things feel closer than they are when the level of detail becomes more crude. And this doesn't happen in new games as much, so I just wanted to point that out because I think it's cool. But the real magic here happens when we start going down to it. The feeling of descending down a path from the high up, poetic, sky-conquered cliffside down into the plain old dirt paths and trees is very great. It's like when you fly over a place in an airplane, you know, and then you land in the airplane and you're like, oh, it wasn't actually a magical miniature land of ants and toys after all. It's just a bunch of dirt down here like everywhere else, which is in some way equally profound. Anyway, let's walk down in there and look at our next location. We're going to be calling this place the Untouched Shoreline because that's basically what it feels like. I think this is the first time I've ever been to this part of the map, which is just a great feeling. And similar to the forest that we looked at, this place kind of just feels untouched by the people of Skyrim. It really does feel like scrambling down a cliffside only to find a relatively normal beach area. But the fact that you were the one to take the time to come down here makes it kind of special, even though there's nothing notable to do. Now, we're surprisingly close to the invisible boundary here as well. It's just over there on the other side of the shore. Places like this kind of make me realize how much traditional game reviews tend to miss the mark for me. Am I wrong that stumbling across a place like this is kind of the greatest miracle of playing a video game? Going places just for the sake of doing it and really feeling like you're seeing something new that you weren't guided to? I mean, yes and no, obviously. There's a gajillion great things about video games, but this is one of them, and nobody ever really mentions moments like this, or things like the Skyrim mountain climbing we mentioned earlier, despite the fact that these things make up the most intimate and affecting parts of the experience of playing certain types of games. We spend more time talking about, God knows what happened in the main story of the game, even though countless people ignore it or don't like it, and like the combat and the quests, which again is all part of it, but whatever. That's enough ranting. Let's go on to the next place. All along the northern edge of Skyrim is the vast Sea of Ghosts, and right on its edge is the next place that we're going to be looking, the Lonely Ice Field. This is an ice field on the northwest edge of the map, way out past Solitude, and while there are a couple of big obvious icebergs to get on top of out here, the real thing we want to see is a little bit less remarkable. This tiny piece of ice that we can stand on. This is the piece of ice furthest away from the shore that isn't outside the invisible barrier, which is about right here. Not even by much. There's another piece of ice just like a few feet back, but this one is the furthest. When you're standing out here, like so many great places in video games, it really does not feel like Skyrim as you might describe it to a friend or in a piece of marketing. Like if you saw a commercial for Skyrim, it would emphasize things like the quantity of the quests or the combat, the dragons, or the ability to play however you want. But in some ways, I've always felt like moments like this, standing on a distant piece of ice, doing nothing, looking up at the northern lights while you're deciding whether or not you should stop playing and go to bed. These are the moments that I remember nearly 15 years after the game came out. Most places on the northern shore of Skyrim offer the same type of experience as what we just discussed. Ice fields, lonely water, open skies, whatever. But there is one more place up here worth looking at, the Big Iceberg. When you're standing on the shore near the city of Dawnstar, you might see it. Way out in the distance, this massive shelf of ice floating out beyond where you would ever really think to go. But even from a distance, it looks significant, like the type of place you would expect to find a cave or a treasure or some sort of obscure quest line. If you swim out to it, it quickly becomes clear that it's actually the opposite, complete desolation. You're almost so far north as to be off the edge of the map, and this particular spot is largely covered by the clouds that shroud the map in mystery. At first, it looks like the sides of the iceberg are unclimbable, but with a little bit of patience and lots lots of Skyrim mountain climbing, you can finagle your way up here and have a look around. As you'd imagine, it's basically just a bunch of snow, but I did notice two great things while hanging out up here. Firstly, it's a great place to watch the day-night cycle and catch some sunsets. Skyrim has an excellent skybox, and it's worth appreciating it from an unobstructed place like this. But secondly, if you find yourself here on a clear night and look straight down at your feet, you'll see something super neat. The sparkling pattern in the icy snow almost perfectly mimics the twinkle of the stars above. Now, I know it may seem dumb and unintentional, because it is a little dumb and unintentional, but having moments where I notice things like this really creates a feeling of connection between me and this totally fictional world. Even talking about it right now, I can perfectly remember the feeling of being on that iceberg, even though I never really was. Like, physically I wasn't, but it feels like I was. God, I love video games. Coming around to the eastern edge of the map, we get away from the ocean and find a brand new style of creating an invisible barrier, an impassible path. It's just east of Refugees Rest, which is east of the city of Windhelm, and it's a simple stone path heading off into the distance that eventually gets so covered in snow as to become impassable. The barrier here is closer than you might expect, and it prevents you from walking even to the visible end of the road before the snow. In some ways, this is similar to those paths on the southern edge of the map in that it implies a connection to a wider world. If you look at a map of Tamriel, which is the world of the whole Elder Scrolls, this particular path would probably head east towards the city of Blacklight in Morrowind. But unfortunately, there's no game in which that area of the world has made an appearance, so we can't go exploring to try and find the connection. The thing I really like about this path is that it's not just an invisible wall. I mean, it is, but it's also covered in snow, which gives it this little sort of excuse to be impassable. And if you look at it for long enough, it starts to feel like any day now. If you can just be patient enough, that snow might melt and you might be able to head to a new city just around the bend, which of course you can't, but it feels like you can. South of this point, we head back up into some mountains, and with a little bit of effort and a lot of patience, we get to our next point, the tallest mountain in Skyrim. Now, this isn't literally true. You can see right here the throat of the world, which is actually the tallest mountain in Skyrim, but getting up to this little point on the map makes it feel a lot taller than the throat of the world. Getting up to the top of the throat of the world is really just a matter of holding forward on a thumbstick, but getting up here requires climbing and falling. It really feels like going up and up and up and finding a place to rest and then going up and up and up some more. It's almost maybe like Mount Everest versus K2. If you're a mountain fan, I don't know, shout out to all my mountain fans. You know, one of these mountains, Mount Everest, is technically higher and more culturally notable, but the other one just takes a lot more effort to get up. And for those that do it, it probably sticks in their mind a lot more. The actual edge of the map is behind us a little ways here, right about here. And it's a shame because it means we can't technically get up to that super high mountain over there, but you know, sometimes not being able to go somewhere is really what makes it special. I'm a huge fan of this little clearing in the mountains up here as well, and you'll find that if you spend a lot of time hopping around in the peaks and valleys that surround Skyrim, there are lots of little empty places like this to explore. There's never anything up here, of course, as far as gameplay is concerned, but you know, making your way up to one of these picturesque, lonely peaks is really something that every Skyrim player should, and probably has, done at some point. But if you haven't, you should go give it a try. The furthest east that anyone can get in continental Skyrim is where we're stopping next, and it's going to be today's mystery box, Giant's Grove. Technically, this isn't a place that I really consider part of Skyrim. If you look on the map, you can clearly see that the icon is indeed the furthest east icon, but this location isn't really a part of the main area of Skyrim. You can only get here by a series of loading screens through a cave. It's not exactly a place that's connected physically to everywhere else that we've looked, which means it's also not up against the edge of the world in the same way. It's the same for a lot of the other separate locations in this game, especially including locations from the DLC like Fort Dawnguard or Castle Volkilhar. Those places are technically further from the map than anywhere else we've looked, but they're also not actually on the map. The focus of this video wasn't so much about what places in the Skyrim canon are the most remote. I'm mostly interested in what types of things we'd find if we ran up against that artificial invisible barrier that every open world game must inevitably include, and none of those other locations would have been interesting in that context. Still, I know if I didn't mention them that people would be wondering why, so this is just me explaining myself to you. Giant's Grove still does have a great vibe, just not quite why we're here for this video. So if you walk south from the cave leading to Giant's Grove for a while, eventually you'll hit this stone path, and if you follow it for long enough, you'll go past Blackbriar Lodge and eventually down into this secluded area in the southeast corner of the map. All the way at the end of that path is our next stop, which I call the Autumnal Gate. This is another one of those wonderful border gateways that we've seen before, but where the other ones we've seen were in lifeless snowy wastelands or out in the middle of the woods, this one here sits out in a beautiful temperate autumn forest, yet somehow it feels even more secluded than the other ones. To get here, like I said, you've got to follow this stone pathway, and the gate itself is at the end of a long sort of valley in what ends up feeling like a dead end. But unlike a lot of the places we've looked at today, this place both doesn't feel like you're getting close to the edge of the world, but it also invites you to come this way. The path is clear, it's paved, it's not way up in some desolate mountains or way out in the middle of the woods. It's pretty close to buildings and caves and civilization. Everything about it feels more like a game. But then you get here and it's not. It's just an open gate that you can't get through. Just a little reminder that you're in a simulation. It feels like being, you know, that moment in a dream where you kind of realize that you're in a dream and you can either keep sleeping or you could force yourself to wake up. That's what I feel like when I come to this gate. The boundary itself is a few feet before the gate, meaning you can't get close enough to see through to the other side without a free cam, and I don't know exactly why, but this might be my favorite gate of them all. Just something about it is really sort of unassuming. We finally made it back around to the south edge of the map, right near where we began, and it's around here that we're going to make our final stop, where it all began. You may not realize it, but this final gate here is a hugely important place in your experience of Skyrim, and to show you, all I have to do is turn around and walk for a second. The first section of the path when you turn around and walk is desolate and snowy, pretty much no matter when you come, and there's not much to do up here, much like all the other locations around the edges of the map, and unlike the last place we were, it actually does kind of feel like you're getting close to somewhere kind of like a boundary when you get here. When the music is hitting just right, super snowy places like this in Skyrim really do make this game feel like the holidays to me. I know everyone has like a holiday thing, some piece of media that you like to consume around that time, and for me, I'm always unsure of what it is until I sit back down and play Skyrim. And I don't even necessarily just mean like cozy or nostalgic, I actually kind of mean like spiritually meaningful, almost religious-ish. A big part of that is just the aesthetic. The music, the northern lights, the snow, the setting, the burning fires, the cozy inns, the lack of social media, the melancholy loneliness of it all. Skyrim is silly. Video games are silly. But man, it never stops surprising me how when I'm not looking, they somehow sneak into my brain and take a seat right next to all of my biggest feelings. And it always kind of happens without me knowing, which is a way that I think video games are super different from other forms of art, where you're always kind of aware of how they're affecting you right when they are. Anyway, sorry, I started yapping for a second. This was almost like a 2023 Annie Austin video, am I right? Yikes. Anyway, where were we? Oh, we're here. Do you recognize this place? No? Okay, what if I say this? Oh, hey, you're finally awake. That's right. If you follow the path from that gate that we were looking at the edge of the world, that path leads directly to here, which is where the journey of Skyrim begins with that iconic cutscene in the prisoner cart at the very beginning of the game. So when they say that they caught your character trying to cross the border at the start of the game, maybe they meant Skyrim's border back at that gate at the edge of the map, which is a fun little detail. But maybe in some way, what they actually meant was a different border. Maybe the border they caught you on was the border between reality and the video game. I'm Annie Austin, thanks for watching.